Hope is something that is very distinctive in the Christian worldview. Every worldview has to deal with some of the basic fundamental questions, but only Christianity can answer the question of hope and expectation the way that no other can. For an example, if you and I were raised in Eastern mysticism, one of the major religions of the world that fall under that category, we would be raised from the time that we are born to believe that we're to be good in life, and then when we die, we'll be reincarnated and we'll come back based upon the living of the previous life. And we're going to continue on the circle of life, the wheel of life, until hopefully one day we achieve a point to where we absolve into nothingness in the universe, and that's what our lives are about. Or as another world religion would say, you're supposed to reach a state of nirvana where you no longer have any feeling whatsoever and basically just absolve into the universe. Doesn't sound very hopeful to me. Christianity is the only religion that offers the proper understanding and foundation to this question of putting hope into the hearts and minds of people. That's why Romans 8 and verse 24, he said we're saved by this hope. Colossians 1, hope is mentioned 3 times, but in verse 23, he says the hope of the gospel, the hope that is attached to the gospel message, is one that helps us and blesses us. Now, hope, recently I had to speak on this subject of hope under the acronym of helping others prepare for eternity. That was what they used to describe hope. And when you think about that, when we think about helping other people prepare for eternity, probably the most common understanding of that is helping people who have no hope whatsoever. That is, people who've never known Christ, never known the gospel. How do we help them gain that hope? And usually it's an evangelistic discussion, and it's right to do that. Okay? It is certainly right to do that. However, when you look at Hebrews, which has a lot to say about hope, Hebrews is written to a group of Christians who are struggling, who have in certain ways lost their hope or are forfeiting their hope to go back to the old ways of the old law. And so when we think about those Christians and their struggles, for an example, when you open the book, in chapter 2 and verse 1, he tells them, therefore, we must pay much closer attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away from it. And so in the opening of the book, there's this process of drifting. It's used, a word picture would be something like, I remember my grandmother had this little, it was a little dove-shaped thing. Well, the outside of it was a dove, and it was where she would take her rings off and she would drop them on there when she did the dishes. And then when she was done with the dishes, she'd take the rings off and put them back on her fingers. But the reason why was what? She didn't want to, first of all, get them all nasty and dirty, but also she didn't want to lose them and let them slip down the drain in the process. That's the idea of drifting. It's like a ring sliding off of your finger before you know it. And so when you begin the book, they're drifting. When you get toward the middle or the latter portion of the book, they have made it their ethic to forsake the people of God. Not forsaking the assembling of ourselves together as the manner of some, is what the King James said. And the word translated, and we'll talk more about this passage next week, the word translated, as is the manner of some, is the word ethos. We get our English word ethic from it. So here you go from a group of people who are drifting to a people who have made it their ethic to not be with the people of God when they gather. And then when you come to the very end of the book, when you look in chapter 12, beginning in verse 3, he says, consider him who endured from sinners such hostility against himself, so that you may not grow weary or faint-hearted. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. And so you have people who are drifting, who are walking away from Christianity, and it has to do with persecution that is being placed upon them. And so he closes with this admonition in verse 12 of chapter 12. Therefore, lift up the drooping hands and strengthen your weak knees and make straight paths for your feet, so that what is lame may not be put out of joint, but rather be healed. And that's why in chapter 13 and verse 22, he describes this letter this way. He says, I appeal to you, brothers, bear with my word of exhortation, or encouragement, for I have written to you briefly. And so this letter is written to encourage Christians who are drifting, who have ethically forsaken what it is that God has done because of persecution or because they want to go back to the old religion. Now, when you bring it down to modern 21st century America, we might not be leaving Christianity to go into the Jewish religion. But plenty of people are leaving Christianity. But here's the thing. You can leave Christianity and still come to church every Sunday. You can leave Christianity and still come to church every Sunday. We just choose to follow other pursuits. We choose to make other things primary goals, and God just kind of gets what's left. We end up leaving our hope behind. And so when we think about developing hope for people who are struggling as Christians, we're going to look at this, and we can make the applications in both ways. For a person who may be struggling with Christianity's message, and in the last few weeks alone, I have heard report after report of people that I know who have said that they're done with Christianity. Or others who have plans to, when they graduate from high school, they're done with Christianity. What do we do to help people who struggle in their faith? What do we need to say to them? What is our responsibility as we try and help people who struggle in their faith? And then what is the message to what do people who are struggling in their faith really need to hear? Well, in Hebrews, as a letter of encouragement, there is, in Greek, there are different moods by which you speak. Every language basically has them. But there is what we call an indicative mood, which is where a statement of fact, okay, you state a fact, such as, this is my water bottle. Statement of fact. They call it the indicative mood. But there's this other mood called the subjunctive. And the subjunctive is kind of like a realm of possibility, okay? So the subjunctive being this realm of possibility, it would be the equivalent to me saying in English, I may drink some water. What am I saying? I'm not saying I'm going to drink it. I'm not saying I'm not going to drink it. I'm saying I may drink it. It's the realm of possibility. It's the realm of theoretical. But it's also, the subjunctive is also used in a sense of encouragement. This is what you should do. So it's in that realm of possibility. This is where you are, and therefore this is what you should do. Now, I bring that up to say this. In Hebrews, there are 14 what we call oratory subjunctives. That is, 14 statements where the writer is encouraging them from where they are to what they should do. And each of them are preceded by two words, let us. There are 14 of these statements in Hebrews, and that's what we want to look at. Obviously, we're not going to look at them all today. We're going to split them up. We'll take some this Sunday morning. We'll take some next Sunday morning. But we're going to look at what he says to struggling Christians if they want to move from their struggles to the possibility, to the realm of their faithfulness. Okay? Now, we begin in chapter 4, where our scripture reading was a moment ago, because this is where we meet the first several of these subjunctives. First of all, he tells us that we need to acknowledge some things. Now, in chapter 4, which is a continuation of chapter 3, Hebrews is very hard to divide, especially into chapters. But in chapter 4, he's been talking about how, or in chapter 3, he's been talking about how Jesus is superior to Moses and talks about the disobedience in the wilderness. And then he continues that in chapter 4 and verse 1. When he says, therefore, while the promise of entering his rest still stands, talking about the rest of God in heaven, let us fear, lest any one of us seem to have failed to reach it. For good news came to us just as to them, but the message they heard did not benefit them because they were not united by faith with those who listened. So, the first subjunctive, the first encouragement that's going to help us move from this area of struggling to an area of stability is to fear. Now again, that seems counterproductive. And especially in a culture that doesn't believe you should really fear anyone or anything. And especially in, a lot of people, when they think of preaching, they think of basically hellfire and brimstone. They think of Jonathan Edwards' classic sermon, Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God, and they think that's what all preaching is. And to be honest with you, to be fair with you, for some people, that is all they preach. All they ever preach is fear. And that is a problem. But one of the things we have to understand is this: just because a person may be disproportionate in the way they preach and the way that they spread fear, does not mean that we should run to the opposite direction and have no fear. That's called reactionary theology, and it's just as wrong as being an extreme right of using judgment and dangling it over people's heads constantly. So, here's what we have to understand. There is a sense in which we certainly should fear God. For an example, there are two different types of fear that are spoken of in the Bible. Not necessarily in different words, but contextually we understand that they're being used differently. Okay, for an example, there is a servile fear, which is, let's say you were kidnapped by someone this afternoon, and you would rightly be afraid, and a dread would come over you because you wouldn't know what they're going to do to you, right? You would play all these different scenarios in your head, but you don't know exactly what they're going to do to you. That's servile fear. The one that the Bible uses most often in reference to God is what we call a filial fear. It's familial in its nature. So, when I was growing up, did I know that my father had the ability to pummel me if he wanted to? If we got into a fight, it wasn't going to be a match. I knew he could, but was I ever concerned my dad was just going to walk by and punch me in the face? No. I knew he was capable, but I wasn't concerned that he was doing it because there was a character to him that would dictate the way that he treated me. And so when we're talking about fear, and by the way, there is the healthy sense of fear. A person who has no fear is foolish. We were given fear by God for a reason. There must be a reason for which he gave it to us. And so when we think about fear, we don't need to, in Christianity, get into the right side of the ditch and say, I'm always worried that I'm going to hell. That's not a healthy fear to walk around with. That's not something Jesus died to give us. But we don't need to go to the opposite extreme either and say, you know what? God is just some great cosmic grandfather who's going to let me get away with what I want to. That I don't ever have to fear about God doing anything to me because he loves me. He does love me. But loving me and approving of my behavior are two different things. And this same book in Hebrews still says, at the end of it in chapter 10 and verse 31, it is a fearful thing to fall into the hands of the living God. Listen, I don't live my life every day worried I'm going to hell. But you better believe I am afraid of what God can do to me if I become unfaithful to him. I am afraid of that. And I think I would be absolutely insane not to be afraid of that. And that's what he's telling them here. If you walk away, if you leave Christianity, you should be afraid of what's going to happen to you. Look what he did to the people in the wilderness. We should fear what it is that God is doing to us. We should be listening to what God is saying to us. And the point is this: that what we do in Christianity is not a game, and it's not something else. It has eternal consequences as a result of it. This is not, when we come together, it's not a time in our worship to be flippant. It's not a time to joke around about things that don't matter. For the time that we're together, we're discussing things where eternity hangs in the balance. And we need to understand that choosing to walk away from Christianity is not the same thing as choosing to walk away from a school or from a club. It's choosing to walk away from the living God, and that has eternal consequences to it. And when we get together, my favorite statement about preaching outside of the Bible comes from the old Puritan, who always said, I preached as one never sure to preach again. and as a dying man to dying men. We're all dying. We're all dying. And we're all going to spend an eternity in one of two places. There's not a third option. And I would lie to you if I told you one option didn't scare me. For multiple reasons. We need to fear. But then in that same chapter, he goes on to say this. In the same discussion in verse 11, he says this. He says, "Let us therefore strive to enter that rest, that no one may fall by the same sort of disobedience." So to strive, literally to strive earnestly, to concentrate your attention upon, to be zealous toward, to throw all of your energy into, strive to enter into that rest. That the whole of who we are is invested in this one thing. And that is to be with God. For an eternity to rest in and with God. There's a song that, I don't know if it's on the radio or not, it's a song that's religious in its nature. But I think about the words of it quite often. The song is called "Well Done." And in the words of the song, they go through and they communicate a different message. And it's a good song as far as when you look at the message of it, extremely good. But in the refrain, as they go around each time and as they turn to the chorus, "I'm waiting my whole life just to hear you say, 'Well done.' Until then, I will live my life to hear you say, 'Well done.'" Because that's all that matters. I'm living my life to hear those two words. It doesn't matter if I ever step foot in Disney World, and it doesn't matter if I can't pay my children's college tuition, and it doesn't matter about all these things we worry about. The only thing that matters are "Well done" or "Depart from me, you cursed." Those are the only two things that matter. Therefore, the whole of our being should strive for the one that we desire. And he's saying, if you're struggling, it's because many times we split our strivings. We want to strive after all these different dreams, which many of them are not bad in and of themselves. But we allow those dreams to become primary and God to become secondary. And so if we're helping someone prepare for eternity who has their priorities out of line, they need to understand. And if I'm someone who has my priorities out of line, I need to understand that all my energy needs to go into one moment. All my life needs to be dedicated to one moment, and that's when I stand in front of the one who died for me, and I'm listening to the final verdict. Because if I don't hear "Well done," my life was wasted. My life was wasted. What was the point of me living it? So if a person is struggling in their faith, the first thing they have to do is acknowledge the seriousness and the gravity of what it is that we're dealing with. Number two, staying in Hebrews chapter 4, we run into two more encouraging statements. And we're reminded that we need to remember an advantage that we have in Christ. Chapter 4, let's read verses 14 through 16, and then we will take them individually. He says, "Since then we have a great high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but one who in every respect has been tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us then with confidence draw near to the throne of grace, that we may receive mercy and find grace to help in time of need." So first of all, in verse 14, let us hold fast our confession. That is, since we have a great high priest who has passed into the heavens, the high priest's job is to represent the people before God. That's what he does. Even in the Old Testament, that's what the high priest was for. He represented them. He went in Leviticus 16 on the Day of Atonement. He represented them, and he brought the blood for the offering. And he had, of course, the breastplate that had all the different stones that indicated the 12 tribes. He was their representative. And so we have a great high priest who is in the heavens, and because of that, we hold fast to our confession. Confession here is standing for all of Christianity, what we confess with our mouths, what we confess with our lives, what we confessed when we were baptized into Christ. It's a confession is a whole, all-encompassing idea here. We hold fast to our confession, as opposed to those who are willing to let it go, we cling to it. And why do we cling to it? Because we have a representative in heaven. We have a high priest who represents us in heaven. And listen, if we walk away from Christianity, we forfeit heavenly counsel. We forfeit heavenly counsel. That means when we cry to God, it's not going to happen. Jesus represents his people. So he says, let us hold fast. We hold on to it because we've got Jesus representing us in heaven. And number two, he says, let us with confidence draw near to the throne of grace. That is, a throne that is characterized by grace, by God's grace, which is very vividly illustrated in Revelation 4 when you see a picture of the Father seated on the throne and there's a rainbow above his throne. It's symbolic of God's grace, that his throne is characterized by gracious activity. And so what he's saying is, we have a representative in heaven, and because of that, then we can approach heaven in prayer. And by the way, the one who represents us in heaven, the one who talks to God about us in prayer, is one who understands us. In Hebrews 4 and verse 15, right here, what does it say? We don't have a high priest who cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, or is unable to sympathize with us, but was in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin. Now, some people try and push back against that and say, Jesus can't truly represent us because he never sinned. Listen, if he sinned, he can't represent us. People try and look at Jesus and they say, but he was perfect. He can't understand what it's like to be me. That's absolutely false. Just because he didn't fail like we do doesn't mean that he didn't feel the same weights that we do. The temptations that he faced in Matthew chapter 4 were tailored specifically to him. The same way temptations that we face are tailored specifically to us. The long and short of Matthew 4, when you look at those temptations, the long and short of it is this. He was offering Jesus an ability to rule the kingdoms of the earth without having to die on a cross. That's what every one of those temptations were about. He tried to circumvent the mission of Jesus and offer him the easy way out in his mission. That's what that text is about. So Jesus understands. People say, how could he be tempted if he didn't feel the weight of it? Temptation comes because there's an appeal. He knows exactly what it's like to be tempted. He's just the only one who never gave in. And because we have him, we can then go boldly to the throne of grace, having someone who knows what it's like to be us. And as we pray, the most mind-blowing thought in all of the world is that as we pray, Jesus Christ stands up and talks to his Father about us and intercedes for us. In essence, Jesus prays for us. You remember what he said to Peter? He said, Simon, Simon, Satan has desired you that he might sift you like wheat. But I have prayed to the Father for you. That's not just something he did for Peter. That's something he does for every one of his children. Jesus intercedes for us. What's one of the prayers that we pray according to 1 Timothy chapter 2? What's one of the categories? Intercessions. Romans 8, Jesus intercedes for us. The Holy Spirit intercedes for us. Can you imagine walking away and saying, no, I don't want the Son and I don't want the Holy Spirit talking to the Father about me? That's what we're saying. I'm struggling. Well, if you're struggling, do you think forfeiting the representation of the Son and the Spirit in your struggles is the way to help you? Is that going to make you better? Is that going to help you develop spiritually? It gives us the boldness to lay out our feelings. It gives us the boldness to lay out exactly how we feel about the situation. When we talk about how to handle temptations, what should we do? Well, Jesus, of course, quoted Scripture. But you know, you can also pray in the middle of temptation. It would say, I can't tell God I'm being tempted to do something like this. I can't tell God that I'm very discouraged with Christianity and thinking about walking away. And here's my question. Do you think He already doesn't know it? You think He already doesn't know it? Actually, talking to Him would be the best thing in the world you could ever do. He's the one that gave us Christianity. Look at the advantages that we have. That's why He's saying, let us hold fast. Why? Because Jesus is there representing us. Let us draw near. Why? Let us move from instability to stability by drawing near to a throne of grace, something that anchors us in a changing world. But then the last one we'll look at this morning is in chapter 6. Chapter 6, we'll actually back up to 5:11 to begin the reading, where he talks to us about the importance of advancing in our faith. Chapter 5 and verse 11 to begin. He says, about this we have much to say, and it is hard to explain since you have become dull of hearing. For though by this time you ought to be teachers, you need someone to teach you again the basic principles of the oracles of God. You need milk and not solid food, for everyone who lives on milk is unskilled in the word of righteousness since he's a child. But solid food is for the mature, for those who have their powers of discernment by constant practice to distinguish good from evil. Therefore, let us leave the elementary doctrine of Christ and go on to maturity, not laying again the foundation of repentance from dead works, of faith toward God, and instruction about washings and the laying on of hands and the resurrection of the dead and the eternal judgment. And this we will do if God permits. Now, first of all, look how the flow starts. He actually interrupts a statement that he's made in 5:10 about the priesthood of Melchizedek, and he says this, and I'm summarizing it. I would love to make an argument to you, but because you have not grown in your understanding of Christianity, even if I made the argument to you, you would not understand it. You would not understand it. Listen, that still happens today. There are some people you cannot make an argument to them because they don't have the spiritual maturity to understand the argument. And it's not about you being better than someone else. They just spiritually are not mature enough to understand why. Because people who are spiritually immature are only concerned with lines. And they can't ever understand why you would say to someone, you should refrain from a certain activity because of what it could do to your influence over other people, or the danger that it presents to you potentially. People say, but God doesn't say it's wrong. That's spiritual immaturity. Spiritual maturity teaches you what? Yes, there is the line, but there are also other things that could cost you and make you trip and fall over the line. Just because I can dangle myself over the side of the Rocky Mountains doesn't mean that I should. But some people can't receive those types of arguments because they're not spiritually mature enough to handle them. They're still living on milk, lines, letter, Pharisees. They've yet to understand the spirit of the law. Now, What does he tell a group of struggling Christians to do here? Let us leave behind the elementary principles and let us go on to maturity. The unfortunate reality is that there are some people in Christianity that were baptized, say, 20 years ago, and they know basically nothing more 20 years later than they did the day they were immersed into Christ. Their behavior is basically all the same. Listen, Christianity is a revealed religion. You won't get it by feeling it. You won't get it by it overtaking you. You will only get it to the proportion to which you open up the Bible and you listen to it. And it's not just reading the Bible for the sake of reading it. It's actually studying and meditating upon it. And asking myself, if I were to study this passage, if I were to live out what this passage is teaching, what would it look like in my life? And then turning around and doing it. What he's saying is, if you're struggling in Christianity, you need to open your Bible and you need to get in there. Because there is many times a direct correlation between a person's absence of Bible study and spiritual poverty. There's a direct correlation. Listen, I wish there were a magic bullet. I wish there were something that I could do that would make it easier on people, but there's nothing that can be done. It is what it is. Christianity is revealed. It's not a magic formula, but yet it's so simple that anybody can do it. Anybody can sit down, especially in America, and open a Bible and spend time doing it. And when you see people, I have just come to see it, when you see people who behave and act and speak in certain ways, you can rest assured their Bible is rarely cracked. You can bank on it. And what he's telling them here is that you need to push yourself and challenge yourself and go. And people say, but you know, some days I just don't feel like doing it. You ready for this? This is going to be a bombshell. You ready for it? You're normal. You're normal. There are days when I walk into this office, I'd rather do anything than sit down. I don't think that makes me a bad Christian. There are days when I just can't focus, I can't do things. But what do? You do it anyway. You do it anyway. You see, we have allowed our feelings to dictate. So many people, feelings, by the way, which are so wildly deceptive. Listen, I'm a person who has struggled with panic attacks since I was 20 years old. You know what a panic attack tells you? It tells you you're dying. That's what you think the whole time, I'm dying. Because you're exhibiting a lot of the behaviors of a heart attack. Your breathing becomes shortened, your chest gets tight, your fingers and your arms can get numb on you, your legs can give out on you. It has the same characteristics of a heart attack. That's why a lot of people go in thinking they're having heart attacks before they're actually diagnosed with anxiety disorders. I can tell you, your feelings will lie to you. They will lie to you. And if we stay in and say, I'm going to walk away from Christianity and I'm just going to follow these other things and I don't really feel like it, so I don't think I'm going to change my mind. If I never open my Bible, the only narrative I will ever hear is what the world tells me. But when I open the Bible, I'm given another voice into the conversation. I'm given another voice into the conversation. Does that make sense? Instead of simply saying, I'm going to do what I feel like, this is how I feel, 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 I'm opening up a Bible and I'm allowing God to insert another voice alongside of mine to challenge what I'm thinking. That's what has to happen. And that's where we display our love and our commitment to God. Anybody can do Christianity when it feels good. Anybody can do that. But if I'm only, listen, what if we were only committed to our children in those moments where we're just swept up with their cuteness? You got teenagers? The cuteness factor tends to fade sometimes the older they get. But yet, there's a reason why when they misbehave, we resist the urge to do certain things. Because we still love them in the midst of their ugliness because we're committed to them. And with God, we're showing Him when we don't feel like it and yet we go after it and we continue to do it, we continue to go after it, we continue to go after it. You know what we're telling Him? We're telling Him that our love for Him is not based on all the conditions being right. I will be committed to you as long as all the conditions are right. As long as everything is perfect and as long as I feel well, you will get me. When we can do things when we don't feel like it, we're telling God, my commitment to you does not depend upon how I feel from moment to moment. My commitment to you is a choice. And in my choices, I am loving you with everything that I am. So if we want to grow, if we want to move forward as we struggle, we're going to have to do things like open our Bible that may feel counterintuitive at the moment. But it's the most important thing in the world we could do in that moment. And so, whoever the writer of Hebrews may be, this is what he's telling us to do. Let's acknowledge what is at stake here. There are eternal things that hang in the balances. Acknowledge, look at the advantages that we have with Jesus and the representation that we have before God, and then anchor down and start opening up our Bibles and advancing and understanding and growing and learning. That's the way you move through struggles. And maybe someone this morning is struggling in Christianity. Maybe you're thinking about walking away from it. I would just encourage you to do this. Please don't make a choice to walk away from Christianity without talking to someone about it. Please don't make that choice without talking to somebody. Maybe someone this morning is outside of Christ and they need to move into the realm of Christ. With a penitent faith to be baptized into the body of Christ, 1 Corinthians 12 and verse 13, Galatians 3:26 and 27. To become a New Testament Christian. Or maybe as New Testament Christians, we're weak and we're struggling, and we need to move into this realm of possibility where we can be encouraged and become better than we are. We would love to help anyone do that tonight. And that's not just this morning. That doesn't have to be always public. If you're struggling with something, just talk to someone about it. And if this is an occasion that could help you do that, we want to do that for you. If it's sometime else, take advantage of that time as well. Let's help one another. If we can help you this morning, let us know as we stand and sing this song.